It was 11:51 p.m. in my Chicago apartment when my phone lit up. An email from my mother. Jennifer. The subject line was just, workshop. My heart dropped. The email was short. Venus. Kevin and I have decided. We're selling the workshop to his investors. I need you to sign the papers to release your co-ownership from your father's will. This is for my future. Betrayal. Cold and instant. Before I could even process it, a second email landed. This one. From a law firm I didn't recognize. On behalf of our client, Kevin Doyle, we are authorized to offer you a sum of $10,000 for your full and immediate release of all claims. $10,000 for my father, Michael's entire life's work. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Especially when a loved one's legacy is threatened. Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to know if we share that feeling. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel the hot flush of anger I expected. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me. This wasn't a family drama. This was an attempted theft. I ignored the $10,000 insult. At 12:03 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after my mother's email, I was on the phone with Robert Chen, my father's oldest friend and our family's lawyer. It went to voicemail. I didn't hesitate. Robert. It's Venus Morgan. I'm sorry for the hour. But it's happening. They're trying to sell the workshop. They are in breach. I spoke calmly. My voice steady. Activate the artisan clauses immediately. Freeze all transactions. All assets. I'm on the first flight to Maine in the morning. I hung up. I opened my laptop. Booked a one-way ticket from Chicago to Portland. And then I opened my encrypted files. You see, they made a critical mistake. They thought I was the estranged daughter, the one who ran off to the big city to become a successful architect and forget about them. They forgot that I was also the silent architect. They forgot who co-signed the original expansion loan with my father, Michael, when no bank would give him the time of day. They forgot who poured over the legal contracts with him, who drafted the blueprints for the new wing, and who insisted on that tiny, ironclad clause, the artisan clause. A little provision I'd slipped in, specifying that the property could only be used for master-level custom craft. It legally forbade any mass production. Any cheap knockoffs? It was a failsafe, designed to protect my father's art from a world that valued speed over soul. I just never imagined I'd have to use it to protect him from his own wife. They also conveniently forgot about the last 3 years. After Dad died, my mother couldn't handle the finances. The workshop, his legacy, was 2 months from a tax auction. I got the notice. I didn't call her. I didn't lecture her. I just paid it. $12,000. Wired from my Chicago account. I'd been paying the property taxes in secret ever since. They saw me as the daughter who left. They were about to meet the partner who never did. But the $12,000 for the taxes, that was just the maintenance. That wasn't the real investment. What they really forgot, what they had so easily erased from their memory, was the $85,000 structural restoration I'd funded 4 years ago. Just after Dad died, and just before Kevin slithered into my mother's life, Dad and I had designed it together. He called it the Foundation Project. He knew the main workshop, built in the 1940s, was failing. The sea air was rotting, the main support beams. The roof was sagging. He was a master boat builder, but he wasn't an engineer. I was. I flew home 3 weekends in a row. I took structural surveys, drew up the architectural plans, and hired the contractors myself. And I paid for all of it. $85,000. It wasn't a gift. It was an investment in our shared legacy. I sent my mother the paid invoices. A clear paper trail. Thinking I was protecting her future. Protecting our future. I was naive. I thought I was protecting the workshop from the world. Not from my own mother. The next morning, my phone erupted. It was Jennifer. My mother. I was in a cab from the airport. The cold Maine coastline, whipping past the window. I answered. It wasn't a hello. It was a shriek. Venus, what did you do? What did you do? Robert Chen froze the accounts. Kevin's investors are furious. He's going to lose the deal. You're destroying everything. I kept my voice perfectly level. I'm protecting what Dad built. What Dad built? She scoffed. Her voice dripping with a panic I'd never heard before. Dad is gone. Venus, this is about my future, my life. You have your fancy life in Chicago. What do you care? Before I could answer, the phone fumbled. I heard a muffled, angry voice. Kevin, you think you're smart? Don't you? You little brat. His voice was thick with whiskey. Even at 9 a.m. You think you can just waltz in here with your lawyer? That workshop is mine. I'm the one who's been running it into the ground. You mean? I said, the coldness in my own voice surprising me. You'll regret this. He snarled. You're going to get nothing. You hear me? Nothing. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone humming in my hand. The anger still wasn't hot. It was crystalline. It was precise. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, a notification from Facebook. My grandmother, Susan, had tagged me in a post. It was from my mother. A public post. On the small town's community page. It's just so sad. She wrote. When children forget who raised them. When they get so successful and cold-hearted that they would try to steal their own mother's future right out from under her. Please pray for us. We are being attacked by our own family. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of daughterly obligation snapped. She hadn't just chosen him over me. She had chosen him over my father's memory. And she had just given me permission to wage total, uncompromising war. I flew into Portland and met Robert Chen at his office. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was practically my uncle. He was the one who'd held me on his shoulders at the boatyard picnics. Now, his face was grim, but his eyes were sharp. Venus, he said, sliding a thick document across his desk. You were right to call. And you were smarter at 19 than most people are at 50. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. The artisan clause. It's beautiful. The property shall be used exclusively for the purpose of master-level custom craft. Any mass production or sale of prefabricated goods shall be considered a material breach of this deed. Robert leaned back. Kevin Doyle isn't a boat builder. He's a kit assembler. He's been buying cheap fiberglass hulls from overseas and passing them off as Morgan-inspired designs. He is in clear. Undeniable violation. The validation was cold, sharp, and satisfying. So the injunction holds, I said. It wasn't a question. It holds, Robert confirmed. But to win the lawsuit, we need to prove damages. Not just breach of contract, but the desecration of the legacy the clause was designed to protect. Then we need to do an audit, I said. My voice all architect. A legal audit. We drove to the workshop. My childhood home. I hadn't been back in 4 years. Not since before Kevin. The house itself looked neglected. The custom trim, Dad had milled himself peeling. The garden replaced with gravel. But it was the workshop that made my blood run cold. Kevin was there, standing by the bay doors, a bear in his hand. He smirked when he saw me. The conquering hero returns. Come to see what a real business looks like. I ignored him, my eyes scanning the room. I felt like I was walking through a crime scene. Where is it? I asked. My voice dangerously quiet. Where's what? The lathe. Dad's workbench. The one he built from the salvaged mast of the Albatross. Kevin gestured with his beer toward a pile of scrapwood in the corner. That old piece of junk rotted out. Had to tear it out. Made space for the new finishing station. He pointed to a cheap, particle board table stained with sloppy varnish. I pulled out my phone. Not to cry. Not to scream. I opened the camera. Robert, I said. My voice clinical. Please document. I began my audit. My father's hand-forged tools, the ones his father gave him, gone from the wall. Replaced with cheap, plastic-handled power tools. The pegboard, where he'd outlined each tool in black marker. Empty. The beautiful, exposed oak beams overhead. The ones I'd helped him sand and oil, covered in a thick, hideous coat of gray paint. And in the main bay, where the half-finished hull of a custom schooner had sat for a decade, my father's unfinished masterpiece, it was gone. In its place were 3 identical fiberglass motorboat shells. The cheap kits Robert mentioned. The air smelled of toxic resin and chemical solvents. Not sawdust and cedar. This wasn't neglect. This was an extermination. He wasn't just running a new business. He was deliberately erasing every trace of my father. He's not just in breach of contract, I said to Robert, loud enough for Kevin to hear. I photographed the sloppy paint, the damaged floor where the workbench had been ripped out. He's committing fraud. Stolen craft. He's using my father's name. Morgan Boats. To sell this? This garbage. Kevin's face went purple. You can't prove a damn thing. This is progress. We'll see, I said, turning to Robert. Get a full accounting. I want to know where every one of my father's original blueprints are. And I want to know where every penny from the sale of his tools went. I turned back to Kevin. You should have taken the $10,000. I thought the fight was about the artisan clause. I thought I was just fighting a con man over a breach of contract. I was wrong. It was so much worse. Robert called me that evening at my hotel. His voice was different. The steady, calm lawyer was gone. He sounded shaken. Venus. I found it. It's not just a breach. It's criminal. I sat down. What do you mean? The $85,000 restoration loan, he said, his voice tight. The money you wired 4 years ago, it never went to the contractors. Kevin intercepted it. I couldn't breathe. He stole it. He did one better, Robert said, his voice laced with disgust. He convinced your mother to pay the contractors from her own savings, telling her it was just a short-term cash flow issue. Then, he took your $85,000 and used it to pay off his personal gambling debts. But that's not even the worst part. I waited, my knuckles white on the phone. He used the cleared property, the one you had just invested in, to take out a new $85,000 business loan. He mortgaged your father's legacy all over again. But he can't, I said, my mind racing. I'm co-owner. I never signed anything. He forged your mother's signature on the loan documents, Robert said quietly. And Venus. The bank records show he tried to forge yours, too. They flagged the signature mismatch, which is why he had to go to a private lender. But the intent is there. This is bank fraud. Forgery. Larceny. The floor just fell out from under me. This wasn't about cheap fiberglass. This was a systematic plot to gut our family and sell its bones. How, I whispered. The word barely audible. How could she let this happen? How could she be so blind? I could hear Robert sigh. She wasn't blind. Venus. She was trapped. And that's the part that's hardest to understand. Isn't it? We look at people like my mother, Jennifer, and we scream. How could you be so stupid? But it isn't stupidity. It's a psychological trap. It's called emotional dependency. When my father died, he didn't just leave a hole in her life. He left a void of validation. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost her entire sense of self. And then Kevin arrived. Charming. Attentive. Making her feel seen again. By the time his mask slipped, by the time the drinking and the bad investments started, she was already in too deep. Her fear of being alone again was stronger than her fear of him. He isolated her, telling her family didn't care, telling her I didn't care. He made her believe he was the only thing standing between her and total loneliness. It's not weakness. Not in the way we think. It's a form of learned helplessness. You become so convinced you have no other options that you just stop fighting. You become a willing victim, a cosigner to your own destruction, just to have someone to eat dinner with. I understood. But understanding and forgiving are two very different things. He didn't just defraud a bank, I said to Robert, the cold clarity returning. He preyed on a grieving widow. He targeted my family. Venus, what are you asking me to do? File it, I said. All of it. The breach of contract, the civil suit for damages, and the criminal complaint for forgery and fraud. Send the entire file to the district attorney. No more negotiations. The war had just changed, and I was about to end it. The final confrontation was set. Robert, the local sheriff, a man who'd known my father his whole life, and I pulled up to the workshop. They were there. Just as Robert predicted. Kevin and Jennifer weren't packing. They were moving, trying to get equipment and 2 of the fiberglass boat kits onto a flatbed trailer before the full injunction was served. They were liquidating the assets. Kevin saw us. His face, already flushed from drinking, went a dark, blotchy purple. You, he screamed, pointing at me. You can't be here. This is my property. I have investors waiting. This is not your property, I said. My voice was low, and it didn't shake. I stepped out of the car, holding a single folder. The sheriff stood beside me, his hand resting calmly on his belt. I have a deal. You can't do this. This is my business, Kevin shouted, moving toward me. It was never your business, I said, holding up the single document Robert had printed. It was his. I let him see the highlighted words. The artisan clause. The one my father and I wrote. The one you violated the second you brought this cheap plastic garbage onto his property. The injunction is absolute. You've been in breach for 3 years. Kevin's eyes darted to the sheriff, then back to me. He looked like a cornered animal. But before he could lunge, my mother ran from the house. Her face was a mess of tears and panic. She grabbed my arm. Venus. No. Please. Please. Honey. Don't do this. I looked at her, my face like stone. We'll lose everything, she wailed, her voice cracking. The house. The workshop. We'll have nothing. Kevin was trying to build us a future. This, I said, gesturing to the cheap fiberglass hulls, is not a future. It's a desecration. Please, she begged, clutching my jacket. If you ever loved me, do this for me. Do it for your mother. That was it. That was the moment. The air went still. I looked directly into her eyes. And for the first time, I didn't see my mother. I saw a stranger. I'm not doing this to you, Jennifer, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. I'm doing this for Dad. I pulled my arm free. I turned away from her, to the sheriff, and handed him the second folder I was carrying. The thick one. This is the court injunction. Sheriff. And this? I said, tapping the binder. Is the criminal complaint? It's the evidence of bank fraud, forgery, and the theft of an $85,000 loan. My mother's face went white. Kevin just stared. Comprehension, dawning too late. The sheriff looked at the top page, then at Kevin. Kevin Doyle. You're under arrest for fraud and forgery. It was like a dam broke. Kevin exploded. He didn't just resist. He raged, screaming curses at me, at my mother, at the sheriff, calling me a vindictive... Well, you can guess what he called me. As the sheriff cuffed him and read him his rights, Kevin was still threatening me. You'll get nothing. I'll burn it all down before I let you have it. The sheriff just pushed him into the back of the cruiser. My mother. She just collapsed. She sank to the gravel driveway, sobbing. A broken, empty sound. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I turned my head and looked past her, into the workshop. I just stared at the empty space on the floor. The oil stains and bolt holes where my father's workbench had stood for 30 years. The place where he'd taught me to use a compass, to respect the grain of the wood. The heart of the entire workshop, ripped out and sold for scrap. I took a breath. Goodbye, Jennifer. And I turned around, got in my car, and drove away, leaving her there in the ruins. Kevin was convicted on all counts. Forgery, Wirefraud, larceny. His stolen craft narrative, the one he'd carefully built in town, crumbled overnight. The local paper ran a story about the con man who'd tried to steal the Morgan Boatyard legacy. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. My mother, Jennifer, she wasn't charged. Robert and I had argued. But in the end, the DA saw her as a victim of financial and emotional abuse. She was broken. With Kevin gone, the fog of her emotional dependency finally began to lift, replaced by a crushing wave of shame. She moved in with her sister, my aunt, and for the first time in her life, she started going to therapy. Our relationship isn't fixed. I don't know if it ever will be, but it's quiet. I spent the next month in Maine, not in the house, but in the workshop. The smell of chemical resin and cheap paint was overwhelming. I hired a crew, and we began the purge. We tore out the particle board tables. We stripped the gray paint from the oak beams. We scrubbed the floors, trying to erase the oil stains from his shoddy kit assembly. It was on the last day, while sweeping out a pile of debris from under the main floorboards, that my broom hit something solid, a loose plank. My heart pounded. I got a crowbar and gently pried it up. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth and nestled in a small, custom-built recess in the foundation, was my father's tool roll, his hand-forged chisels, his custom-handled mallets, the marking gauge he'd made from brass and rosewood. The tools Kevin had claimed were rotted junk. He hadn't sold them. He just hadn't been smart enough to find them. I sat on the dusty floor, holding the cold steel in my hands, and I finally cried. I looked around at the empty, clean workshop, and I thought about my 11 years away in Chicago. For so long, I'd carried this heavy, sharp guilt about leaving. I'd told myself I was the cold daughter, the one who abandoned her family, the one who ran. But sitting there, holding my father's legacy in my hands, I realized the truth. We're taught that loyalty to family is absolute, that cutting ties, even toxic ones, is the ultimate betrayal. But sometimes, leaving isn't an act of abandonment. It's an act of self-preservation. It's not running from something. It's running toward the only version of yourself strong enough to survive. I had to leave. I had to go to Chicago. I had to become a successful architect. I had to build my own armor, my own wealth, my own strength. I had to spend 11 years forging myself into a weapon, so that when the time came, I could return and fight the war they had declared on me. My distance wasn't a weakness, it was my training. I stood up. I walked to the one workbench that had survived the drafting table my father and I had built together. I unrolled his original, hand-drawn blueprints for the schooner he never got to finish. The ink still sharp, the lines precise, and right next to them, I unrolled my own, a new set of blueprints, the ones I'd been designing in my head for a decade. The title block was simple: the Michael Morgan Institute of Artisan Craft. The workshop was quiet. It was no longer a tomb. It was a foundation. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like and subscribe button. But more importantly, I really want to know what you think. What is real justice? Is it punishment? Or is it restoration? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read all of them, and I'd love to hear your perspective.